everyone, we welcome you to our program. We are the poetry community for everybody. I am your host, Abigail MacDonald. What will we be doing today? Good question, you might ask. We will be having our very first interview. This interview consists of asking the interviewee some questions about her journey with her poetry and her inspiration behind her poetry, etc. Our community. What is our community about? What is poetry community for everybody? Okay. We put out talented and skilled writers on our page to showcase their talents to everybody, to the world. So, just to give you a little more insight on our community. We like to post inspirational quotes on Mondays and also poems from our tags. Tuesdays and Wednesdays we will post short and long poems, and Fridays we post poetry and quote of the week. Sundays and Saturdays are art. The reason why we also post art is because our community is not strictly for poetry. It's also for art, but we mainly focus on poetry. Admins and admins and founders. Our founder Abigail MacDonald, our co-founder Glory, and our admins Anton and Kelly Holland. More insight about our community. We started this community in December 2020. We have 844 followers on Instagram. Find us at Instagram Poetry Community for Everybody. We are at Instagram right now, but we plan to expand sooner or later. But before we go right into our interview, we are going to share with you just an inspirational quote. Thank you. Our inspirational quote. Poetry is when an emotion has found its thought and the thought has found words. Robert Frost. Let's get right into the interview. Our interviewee for this afternoon's program is Glory Sabashid. She is a brilliant writer and poet. You can find her on Instagram at Glory's Writings. Also on Wattpad, Glory Sabashid on Mariki. Welcome Glory as she comes.
Thank you, Abigail, for your nice introduction of Poetry Community for Everybody. Definitely, it's a noble effort to give chance to all the poets, writers, and artists to showcase their talent. And thank you so much for your warm welcome to me and giving me this opportunity to use this platform to share my journey. Thank you so much for that, and thank you for making time for me and giving your valuable time that I can share about my personal journey in writing and poetry. Thank you, Poetry Community for Everybody, for making me an important part of this unique group, this community. Thank you so much, and thank you, Abigail, for trusting me. And I also appreciate for your innovative idea to conduct this virtual interview. Thank you.
First interview question. When did you get into poetry?
My uncle was a good singer and he used to write poems, compose songs, and music on them. And so I had little bit knowledge on poetry. Often I used to read his diary of those poems, and it used to fascinate me a lot. I used to see the structures, and all his close friends and cousins, they were also all good singers, musicians, and artists. So whenever they were together, often they used to be busy in making good songs, writing poetry, making music, always busy in such creativity. So since childhood, I have been raised in that environment, and I used to love that. Unconsciously, I was fascinated about all those artistic creativity, but I had never thought that I will ever go into poetry. It was completely out of my mind. It was never my plan, it was never my idea, because I used to find this poetry quite hard and tough because I was very young at that time. But once, actually, I tried to attempt few writing like my uncle and wrote a poem, a very short poem, and I found it actually tough and hard, found it difficult. But anyhow, I wrote and I felt good. So actually, my that experience I shared to my few friends in class that I wrote a poem. They had remembered that, and just after a few days, our teachers were searching for students to send them into competitions for various round in many sections like in essay, acting, singing, and all such kind of things. But there was no one to represent in poetry composition. And my friends, they suddenly gave my name that I write poems, and I was completely shocked. I was telling them to not give my name, but the more firmly they gave my name. And so our teacher selected me for the poetry composition, and that's how I entered into poetry. And surprisingly, one after one, I I actually won in many rounds of poetry composition among so many students, and I actually went to state level. That's how I got into poetry, surprisingly, without my any idea or plan about that. But I never looked back since then, and that was the beginning of my poetry journey.
Well, that is awesome, isn't it? That you had, so your uncle was basically your inspiration to join to start writing poems. That is awesome. I am I am I am overjoyed. I must say I am overjoyed to know that somebody, you know, introduced you, or you, I don't know how you would put it exactly, but he was the inspiration, or the key, one of the key factors that you said yes. It will be hard at first, but poetry is really a good way to open up, and certain times my uncle will always tell me, like, Abigail, you know what you should do when you're writing? Any emotions you have at all, just write, and I write. If you see my poems, they're basically emotional poems. So yeah, so I'm glad that your uncle was a stepping stool for you to enter poetry. That is amazing. Okay, thank you, Glory. Our next interview question: what made you get into poetry?
In school, during our literature class, whenever we used to read poetry and our teachers used to read them aloud and explain them beautifully, I was always carried away by it and for its beauty, pleasant sound, the emotion it used to evoke in me, and it used to take me into an imaginary aviation. It used to delight me, thrill me with so much inexplicable joy. For all this quality and ability of poetry to touch our heart and titillate our soul, giving our mind and thoughts a freedom to sell, a very unique freedom. For all this, I got captivated. I was extremely emotional, sensitive, and deep thinking person since very early time of my life, and during various stages of life when I went through severe upheavals in my emotions and many kinds of situations which I faced in my life, many tough times. So when I could not handle those, overflowing emotions and feelings, I needed something to express it, and it is through poetry I found that outlet and I could balance myself. So whenever I was very emotional and I could not handle it, I used to sit and I used to express all my raw emotions in writing. This is the way and how I got into poetry. These emotional upheavals brought me to poetry.
Yes, I can relate to the literature lectures, how poetry is captivating, because when you have a poem that you have to analyze, and then you analyze it line by line, and then you pick out the figure of speeches and all of that, and then the thing is that my teacher always says you should look at the title first, and then you go in and you analyze it line by line. So I feel like after you've done that, then when you break down, as I will always say, those essence, when you remove that cover, you see what this poem is about. You see what this poem really means, and then when you know what this means, and when you look again back at the poem, you're saying, oh, I understand, I see, this is really meaningful, this is really deep, this is powerful. And when you can do that, and when you can understand that, and when you can understand how it is and how meaningful, and then when you take out, you understand why it is covered, and then you can understand that when you take off the cover, there is some depth, so you always know that there is something deeper than just the it itself. It signifies something deeper. Even can connect, depends on the poem, can connect to real life struggles, real life issues. Most poems are. So yes, I'm glad that was captivated enough for you to say you want to go into poetry. You want to start writing poems. Third interview question of the evening. At what age did you find your love in writing? Let's repeat that question. At what age did you find love in writing?
I found my love for writing in my teenage when I was 13 or 14 years old, and throughout my teenage I developed my passion for writing.
Oh, that's great. I feel like those are the best years to start developing a passion because you're going through all these emotions and these experience, and I feel like you would work on your emotions more in your teen years because you're experiencing so much. So I feel like that's a good start to develop poetry or to develop the love in poetry and the passion, because when you're older now, you will learn from those years and you will develop, grow. That's the word I'm looking for. You will grow. Oh, our fourth question of the evening. Oh, this is an interesting one. Are poems just poetry itself? Wow, this is a really interesting question.
Uh, it's quite a tricky question. Are poems just poetry itself? Well, poetry is a vast thing. Poems are just a part of poetry, and poetry is the bigger thing. Poetry is the form of art, and poems are the finished work of that art.
Our fifth interview question. What is your favorite poem?
A Lover's Call, Part 27 by Khalil Gibran is my favorite poem, and this is the poem which actually connected me to poetry, landed me to the world of poetry, and it touched my heart, my soul, and emotion. And I found my path in poetry. Yes, even though I was an English literature student and I had read so many English poems, classic poems, but there was something lacking, like that emotion, and it is only when I got to read Khalil Gibran's poem one day, this A Lover's Call, I was completely blown away. And this is the poem which completely touched my soul and connected me, and I could understand what poetry is, what really poetry is, and how deep it is. Though his words were quite simple, yet so rich in emotion, and they had so much feelings, tenderness, which was quite unique and so powerful, and that completely moved me. And this poem actually inspired me to be a poet. I found my spirit, my style, my confidence, and joy in poetry after reading this poem, and that's why even till day I consider this as my favorite poem, and I love all of his poems.
That is beautiful. That is really beautiful because poetry in itself has this essence of beauty, because poetry is full of depth, because you're reading and and it's not like a normal story that you read. Is reading and then you analyze, and then after you've analyzed it, then you're going to say yes, wow, you're going to see how deep this is, the depth of it all, and how and the good thing is that it depends on how we interpret the poem, to say, because we could always have different different people interpreting this poem, and they have two different meanings, and that is what poetry is. It has so much depth that it gives you of so much feelings, and it has so much interpretation. It's just that you need to follow the right concept. So poetry is really beautiful, and even simple words, when you uncover that shell, you take off that shell, you see the beauty that is within, or would you say under. It's not shallow. It has a cover, but when you remove that cover, you're going to say, wow, this is what this really means. And the essence behind, you're like, wow, this is really beautiful. So I am happy that that poem made you feel like that, open that door for you to say, yes, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to write. I want to when people read my poem, I can get that emotion. They can get that emotion from my poem. They can get that feeling. They can get that depth. They can get that gate to say, yes, I want to do this too, and or I want to read more of this. I want to know more about poetry. I want to 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 get into poetry myself, to make people feel like how I felt. So yes, poetry is really a beautiful concept of writing.